Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're cutting through the fog of war, economic coercion, and geopolitical theater that dominates today's headlines. The mainstream press wants you to consume these stories in isolation, but we're here to connect the dots. From Ottawa to southern Lebanon, from Tokyo's coastline to Brussels' regulatory chambers, a single thread runs through every major story of April 20, 2026, the collapse of the post-war consensus and the scramble for what comes next.
I'm Maya Clarity, and Alex is right. What we're witnessing isn't random chaos. It's the visible decay of an empire-backed order that has governed global trade, military alliances, and media narratives since 1945. Tonight we examine 5 stories the establishment press is treating as unrelated. They are not unrelated. Each one reveals a crack in the American-led hegemonic system, and each one has winners and losers the headlines refuse to name. Let's begin with Canada.
According to The Guardian, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a 10-minute video address today declaring that Canada's economic dependence on the United States, once considered a strength, is now a, quote, weakness that must be corrected. This is extraordinary language from a G7 leader. Carney, a former Bank of England governor and Goldman Sachs alumnus, is not a populist firebrand. When a central banker pivots this hard against Washington, something structural has broken.
And what broke, Alex, is the assumption that tariff weaponization under the second Trump administration was a temporary tantrum. It wasn't. The 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, the annexation rhetoric calling Canada the 51st state, the unilateral renegotiation of USMCA, this taught Ottawa that economic integration with Washington is not a partnership but a leash. Carney is now pursuing trade deals with the EU, UK, and Indo-Pacific partners. The question is, who benefits?
Canadian manufacturers and resource exporters lose in the short term. Diversifying supply chains is expensive, slow, and painful. But who benefits long term? European and Asian capital that has been locked out of Canadian energy, critical minerals, and agricultural markets by North American integration. This isn't Canada going it alone. This is Canada being pried away from Washington's orbit and toward Brussels and Beijing. The Guardian won't say it, but that's the geopolitical reality.
And notice what the mainstream coverage buries, Alex. Carney's address comes as Canadian public opinion has flipped harder against the United States than at any point in modern history. Polling shows Canadians now view America as a greater threat than Russia or China. That's a generational realignment. Yet American media frames this as a trade spat, not what it actually is, the permanent end of the special relationship and the birth of a multipolar North America.
Let's pivot to the Middle East, because while Washington celebrates its diplomatic theater, the ceasefire in Lebanon is a ceasefire in name only. Middle East Eye reports that Israeli forces are systematically flattening civilian buildings across southern Lebanon during what the world calls a truce. Commanders on the ground, speaking to reporters, describe a deliberate demolition campaign targeting homes, shops, and infrastructure in villages that Israel has no legal right to occupy under the November ceasefire terms.
This is ethnic cleansing by bulldozer, Alex. Let's be precise about the language, because the New York Times and BBC will not be. When you destroy villages so their inhabitants cannot return, that is the textbook definition of forced displacement under the 4th Geneva Convention. It is a war crime. And it is happening with American-supplied Caterpillar D9 bulldozers and under the political cover of a Biden-negotiated, Trump-enforced ceasefire that was always structured to benefit the occupier.
Middle East Eye's reporting confirms what Lebanese journalists have documented for weeks, that the Israeli military is leveling the border villages of Kfar Kila, Odessa, Maroun al-Ras, and Ida al-Shab. These are not military targets. These are civilian communities that have existed for centuries. The strategic objective is clear. Create a depopulated buffer zone so Hezbollah cannot rebuild, and so displaced Lebanese civilians cannot return to reclaim their land. It is the West Bank playbook exported north.
Who benefits? Israeli settler organizations and far-right politicians in the Netanyahu coalition who have openly called for, quote, a greater Israel including southern Lebanon. Who loses? 100,000 displaced Lebanese families, a fragile Lebanese state on the brink of collapse, and every international legal institution whose silence further delegitimizes the rules-based order the West claims to champion. The hypocrisy is staggering.
Our third story, also from Middle East Eye, amplifies this. Ali Hassan Khalil, a former Lebanese finance minister and top aide to Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, has gone on the record stating Israel has destroyed entire villages since the ceasefire took effect. When a sitting establishment politician from a country desperately trying to avoid further war makes this accusation publicly, it means the evidence is overwhelming and the diplomatic channels have completely failed.
Khalil's statement matters because Barry's political faction, Amal, has historically been the moderate Shia voice willing to negotiate with Washington. If even Barry's people are going public with atrocity accusations, the Lebanese establishment has concluded that diplomacy through American intermediaries is a dead end. That's a catastrophic failure for U.S. regional influence, and it's being completely ignored by stateside corporate media that still pretends Washington is an honest broker.
And let's follow the money, Maya. Who profits from this destruction? American defense contractors whose munitions are being used, Israeli construction firms that will bid on any future buffer zone infrastructure, and the Gulf monarchies that want a weakened Lebanon permanently dependent on their reconstruction aid. Meanwhile, Iran is strengthened politically because Hezbollah's narrative of perpetual Israeli aggression is now undeniable even to its critics. The war hawks in Washington created the very conditions they claim to oppose.
Let's turn now to the Pacific, where The Guardian reports a 7.5 magnitude earthquake off the Sanriku coast of northern Japan has triggered tsunami warnings and mass evacuations. Australian consular officials are scrambling. Japanese residents along the Honshu coastline are fleeing inland. On the surface, this is a natural disaster story. But Alex, there is nothing natural about the vulnerability being exposed today.
Exactly right. The Sanriku coast is the same region devastated by the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami that caused the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. 15 years later, what has changed? The decommissioning of Fukushima is decades behind schedule. TEPCO is still dumping tritium-contaminated water into the Pacific. And the Japanese government, under pressure from Washington to rearm against China, is diverting billions from disaster resilience into American-made missile systems and F-35 fighter jets.
That's the story corporate media won't touch. Japan is being militarized to serve American Indo-Pacific strategy while its own coastal infrastructure remains catastrophically underfunded. The Kishida and now Ishiba governments have approved the largest military buildup since World War II, yet cannot fund seawalls, early warning systems, or nuclear plant hardening at the levels experts have demanded since 2011. Priorities reveal power structures. Japanese citizens are paying for Washington's containment policy with their physical safety.
And if this earthquake triggers a serious tsunami event at a coastal nuclear facility, the world will witness a 2011 sequel that was entirely preventable. The Guardian's live blog will cover the immediate casualty count, but no major outlet will ask the structural question: why is the world's third-largest economy still running aging reactors in the most seismically active zone on Earth while pouring its treasury into an American-led arms race against Beijing?
Let's close with our fifth story from the South China Morning Post, which reports that Beijing has formally threatened retaliation against European firms if the EU's proposed cybersecurity regulations specifically target Huawei, ZTE, and other Chinese technology companies. China submitted a 30-page document to the European Commission warning of, quote, reciprocal measures. This is economic warfare conducted through regulatory instruments, and Europe is the battleground.
The SCMP framing is careful, but the subtext is explosive. The EU is being pressured by Washington to cut Chinese telecom firms out of European 5G and critical infrastructure, under the banner of cybersecurity. Beijing's response is to weaponize access to the Chinese market, the world's largest consumer base, against any European company that complies. Volkswagen, Airbus, Siemens, LVMH, these firms are now caught in a crossfire they did not choose.
And who wins this confrontation, Alex? American tech giants. Cisco, Microsoft, and a handful of Silicon Valley firms stand to inherit European market share stripped from Chinese competitors. This is not about cybersecurity. This has never been about cybersecurity. This is about American industrial policy using European regulatory bodies as a proxy to lock China out of Western markets while simultaneously preventing European champions from filling the vacuum. It's a double squeeze, and Brussels is complicit.
European citizens will pay higher prices, face reduced infrastructure choices, and see their own economic sovereignty eroded. Meanwhile, the EU commissioners pushing these rules will rotate into lucrative American tech sector jobs the moment they leave office. The revolving door between Brussels and Washington lobbying firms is the actual policy engine here. Journalists who have bothered to map it, like those at Politico Europe and Corporate Europe Observatory, have documented this pattern for years.
Now let's connect all 5 stories, because the pattern is undeniable. Canada is pulling away from American economic dominance. Lebanon is being ethnically cleansed under American diplomatic cover. Japan is bankrupting its disaster readiness to serve American military strategy. Europe is being pressured to implement American industrial policy disguised as cybersecurity. What unifies these stories is a single declining superpower attempting to coerce its allies and punish its rivals as its unipolar moment ends.
And the cost is being paid by ordinary people. Canadian workers facing trade disruption. Lebanese families whose homes are rubble. Japanese coastal residents running from a tsunami while their government funds missiles. European consumers losing access to competitive telecom. These are not abstractions. These are human beings whose lives are being reshaped by elite decisions made in Washington, Tel Aviv, Brussels, and Tokyo without their consent and against their interests.
The mainstream media covers each of these stories as a discrete event with neutral framing that protects the powerful. Reuters, AP, AFP, they report the what but never the why. They quote officials but never follow the money. They describe consequences but never name the architects. This is not journalism. This is stenography for empire, and it is the primary reason citizens in democracies around the world no longer trust the institutions that claim to inform them.
What can you do about it? First, diversify your news diet. Read Middle East Eye, Al Jazeera, South China Morning Post, RT if you can stomach it, and independent outlets like The Gray Zone, Consortium News, and Drop Site News. No single outlet has the full picture, but triangulating across adversarial sources gets you closer to truth than any single Western wire service ever will. Stop trusting monopoly narratives.
Second, follow the money in every story. Ask who profits from the policy, who funds the politicians, who owns the media outlet covering it, and who rotates between government and industry. Open Secrets, Little Sis, and Corporate Europe Observatory are free public databases that will show you networks corporate journalism deliberately obscures. 5 minutes of research per story will transform your understanding of global power.
Third, demand accountability locally. The international order is rotting from the top, but local organizing is where power is actually rebuilt. Pressure your representatives on foreign military aid. Support sanctuary policies. Buy from cooperatives and independent producers. Refuse the consumer relationships that feed the extractive system we've described tonight. Sovereignty begins at the household level and scales up.
Fourth, protect the journalists doing this work. Independent media is being defunded, deplatformed, and in extreme cases, killed. More than 200 journalists have been murdered in Gaza since October 2023 alone, an unprecedented mass killing of press workers that Western outlets have barely acknowledged. Subscribe to independent outlets. Share their work. Defend press freedom as if democracy depends on it, because it absolutely does.
Finally, reject despair. The stories we covered tonight are grim, but they also reveal an empire in decline, which means the future is not written. Canadians are asserting sovereignty. Lebanese and Palestinian resistance continues. Japanese citizens are organizing against militarization. Chinese and European publics are questioning the narratives fed to them. The unipolar moment is ending, and what replaces it will be decided by ordinary people who refuse to stay ignorant.
That's Truth Report for April 20th, 2026. I'm Maya Clarity. The corporate press will not tell you what we told you tonight because their survival depends on you not knowing it. Share this broadcast. Talk to your neighbors. Build parallel institutions. The truth is not a luxury, it is the foundation of every meaningful form of freedom, and it must be actively defended every single day by every one of us.
I'm Alex Truth. Stay skeptical. Stay awake. Stay dangerous to those who would lie to you. We'll see you next time.